A mother's hiking trip takes a terrifying turn when her baby daughter encounters a mother grizzly bear. As danger looms from another aggressive bear, the fierce instincts of both mother and animal ignite a battle for survival. Join us as we explore the heart-stopping moments that test the limits of love and bravery, revealing the extraordinary bond between a mother and her child amidst nature's fury. It was June 4th, 2022, when Sarah Matthews, a 29-year-old single mother, took her 3-year-old daughter Lily and set off for a hiking trip in Yellowstone National Park. Sarah had planned this trip meticulously, knowing the wilderness could be unpredictable. She was absolutely dedicated to making the world a beautiful and safe place for her beloved daughter. But as a single mother, she had learned to anticipate the unexpected. Her daughter was everything to her, and there was nothing Sarah wouldn't do to keep her safe. Sarah had packed everything: first aid supplies, a map, bear spray, and even tranquilizer darts just in case. She knew Yellowstone was bear country, and while many tourists took it lightly, she wasn't about to take any chances, not when her daughter's safety was on the line. Sarah had another advantage too. She was trained in outdoor survival. Paired with her fierce maternal instincts, these skills made her feel ready for anything, or so she thought. The day started out beautifully. The sky was clear, the air crisp with the scent of pine, and the trail wound through the towering trees like an invitation into nature's embrace. Sarah and Lily were on a relatively quiet trail. They hadn't seen other tourists in more than 20 minutes. Only the sounds of birds and the gentle wind punctuated their hike. Sarah kept an eye on Lily, who trotted ahead confidently, her little feet crunching on fallen leaves. Sarah's heart swelled watching her daughter's wide-eyed wonder at every flower and fluttering butterfly. They were a perfect team, a mother and child discovering the wilderness together. But as all mothers know, distractions are inevitable. Sarah's phone buzzed in her pocket with a message about a work issue she thought she'd resolved. She stopped to check it just for a moment. It was longer than she realized. She typed furiously, her mind slipping from the forest around her to the brief crisis unfolding in her inbox. It was an oversight, one she wouldn't forgive herself for. In those crucial moments, while Sarah was distracted, little Lily wandered further along the path, her attention captivated by the forest itself. And then the girl left the path altogether, as if bewitched by the park. The trees seemed taller, the sunlight filtering through their leaves, creating magical, dappled patterns on the ground. She followed a butterfly as it danced through the air, its wings shimmering as if coated in gold. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed alive. Birds chirped above her, and small creatures scurried in the underbrush. Her world was full of wonder, and for a moment, she forgot her mother wasn't right behind her. She walked and walked, venturing further into the wilderness. After a while, Lily reached a clearing. She was unaware that she was, in fact, lost. She was unaware that by then her mother was already desperate with fear. Instead, Lily relished the beauty around her. Then, as if summoned by the forest itself, a large, lumbering figure appeared. Quiet, almost gentle, a mother grizzly bear. Lily stopped in her tracks, her tiny hands resting on her knees as she stared at the bear with innocent curiosity. To Lily, it was a friendly creature, not a potential threat. The bear, too, seemed curious, sniffing the air as she slowly approached the child. The massive animal's presence didn't register as dangerous to the girl. It was as if Lily and the bear were just two beings sharing a moment in the wild. But peace in the wilderness is fragile, and danger often lurks in unexpected places. A second bear emerged from the trees, its eyes locked on Lily. This bear was different. Its stance was aggressive, and its movements were tense. The air shifted as if charged with electricity. The bear's eyes were dark, and it let out a low, menacing growl that echoed through the forest. This wasn't a curious or protective mother bear. This was a predator, and it had found what it wanted. Lily, still frozen, looked up at the new bear, unaware of the danger she was in. Her innocent fascination didn't allow her to grasp the full weight of what was happening, but the mother bear did. Her instincts kicked in immediately, her body shifting between Lily and the approaching threat. With a deafening roar, the mother grizzly reared up on her hind legs, towering over the other bear, challenging it. It was right then that Sarah came sprinting through the trees, her heart in her throat. When she saw the bears and her daughter trapped between them, panic surged through her. She didn't have time to scream or call for Lily. There wasn't time for anything but action. She had come prepared. She pulled the tranquilizer gun from her pack, her hands trembling but her mind sharp with focus. The distance was too great for her to reach Lily in time, and the aggressive bear was already too close. Her only chance was to protect her child with the weapon in her hands. But then, as Sarah took aim, she saw something incredible. The mother bear attacked the other grizzly. The fight was vicious and primal. The aggressive bear lunged. First, its teeth bared and claws extended, swiping at the mother grizzly with brutal force. The sound of claws tearing into fur echoed through the trees. The mother bear retaliated, slamming into the other with the full weight of her body, forcing it backward. They roared, growled, and snapped at each other in a frenzy of claws and muscle. The mother grizzly fought with the strength of a creature protecting its own, her powerful swipes and bites forcing the other bear to retreat. But the fight wasn't easy. The aggressive bear struck back, tearing into her side with a brutal swipe that left deep, bleeding gashes. The mother grizzly roared in pain but didn't back down. She surged forward again, biting at the neck of the other bear, shaking it violently. For a second, Sarah watched in horror and awe. Then she came to her senses and ran toward Lily. She picked up the child and then managed to hide inside some bushes at the edge of the clearing. The fight raged on, but the mother bear's determination was unstoppable. With a final earth-shaking roar, she clamped down on the aggressive bear's muzzle, shaking it with a force that sent the other bear scrambling backward. Wounded and defeated, the aggressor finally turned and fled into the trees, its snarls fading into the distance. The forest grew quiet again, the adrenaline fading as the danger passed. The mother bear, bloodied but victorious, glanced at Sarah and Lily's hiding spot before retreating into the shadows, disappearing into the wilderness she came from. She had defended the child to Sarah's endless gratitude. From then on, Sarah decided to dedicate her life to conservation efforts, trying to bridge human and animal understanding. On September 9, 2019, the night shift at a remote logging camp in Oregon began like any other. The workers were spread across the camp, handling routine tasks under the fading daylight. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust and pine, and the distant hum of machinery filled the forest. Jake Owens, a 44-year-old seasoned logger, had just finished inspecting one of the log piles. His years of working in remote areas had taught him to respect nature, but he wasn't prepared for what was about to happen that night. Jake was one of the more experienced hands at the camp, having worked in the logging industry for over 2 decades. He knew the dangers that came with the job: injuries, accidents, isolation. He'd seen it all, but he'd never had an encounter like this. He'd always been a problem solver, someone the crew could count on when things went wrong. But tonight, unbeknownst to him, Jake would be tested in ways he hadn't expected. Jake was walking back toward the main cabin, where the rest of the night shift crew, Mark, Carmen, and Jessica, were working. That's when something caught his eye near the dumpsters. The first thing Jake noticed was that the dumpsters were left open. Jake didn't get the chance to wonder why and whose turn it was to ensure everything was in order before he saw the camp had a bigger problem. There it was, a massive grizzly bear, drawn by the smell of food scraps that had carelessly been left out, rummaging through the trash. Jake froze. He knew the area was teeming with bears, but they rarely came this close to the camp. The bear, large and clearly hungry, lifted its head and locked eyes with Jake. Before he could react, the bear charged. Adrenaline surged through Jake's veins as he bolted for the cabin. His boots pounded against the dirt, his breath coming in short gasps as the bear closed the distance between them. The heavy thud of the bear's paws was terrifyingly close. Jake barely made it inside the cabin, slamming the door behind him just as the bear crashed against it with a force that rattled the walls. Inside, the other workers looked up in shock as Jake stumbled in, breathless. The bear's growls and heavy panting filled the cabin as it clawed at the door, its hunger driving it to become more aggressive. They were trapped. There was no phone signal, and the internet had been down for days due to a recent storm. The isolation they had always appreciated now became their enemy. The nearest town was miles away, and no help was coming anytime soon. The bear circled the cabin, slamming its body against the walls in frustration. Each impact shook the flimsy wooden structure. The workers exchanged anxious glances as the realization set in. This wasn't a bear that would just wander off. It was desperate, and it wasn't leaving without a fight. Carmen and Jessica were the first to move. They barricaded the windows, piling furniture and crates against them. Jake could feel the tension rising in the room, the fear palpable as the bear's attacks grew more forceful. Jake's mind raced. They couldn't stay like this forever. The bear would eventually break in. But they didn't have any firearms in the main cabin, a rule that he had protested time and time again. To be fair, though, Jake didn't want to harm the animal. Killing the bear felt wrong. They had been careless, leaving the dumpsters open, and now this creature was just doing what came naturally, searching for food. As Jake began to formulate a plan, Mark, one of the younger workers, spoke up. Mark had always been a bit of a hothead, someone who thought brute force could solve any problem. He suggested they try to scare the bear away by rushing out to confront it head-on. It was a reckless idea. Jake knew the bear was too aggressive to be scared off at this point, and trying to provoke it would only make things worse. But Mark, fueled by fear and pride, wasn't backing down. Tensions flared as Mark's impatience boiled over. In truth, he wanted to be the top dog. He began arguing, accusing Jake of overthinking the situation and wasting time. The pressure of being trapped, the constant growling and banging from the bear outside, and the fear that they might not make it through the night created a volatile atmosphere. Mark's temper was flaring, and Jake knew he had to take control before things spiraled further. Jake couldn't afford to lose his temper. He calmly laid out his plan. There was no need for heroics. The cabin had a back door which led to a small shed where they stored some of the camp's food supplies. If they could distract the bear long enough, they could make a dash for the shed, grab the extra food, and leave it out far enough from the cabin to lure the bear away. With its hunger satisfied, the bear might lose interest in them and wander off. It was a risky plan, but it was their best shot without escalating the situation. Mark wasn't convinced, but Carmen and Jessica sided with Jake. They all knew that antagonizing a grizzly was a death sentence. Mark, still frustrated, begrudgingly agreed. The group quickly got to work. The tricky part was getting to the shed without the bear noticing. Jake volunteered to go, knowing the layout of the camp better than anyone. He crouched by the back door, waiting for the right moment. The bear was still focused on the front of the cabin, growling and pawing at the door. With a deep breath, Jake slipped outside, his heart pounding in his chest. Every step felt like a gamble. He could hear the bear's heavy breathing on the other side of the cabin as he darted across the yard to the shed. Once inside, he grabbed more food and quickly set it up in a trail leading away from the cabin, carefully placing it at a distance that would hopefully keep the bear's focus long enough for them to make their next move. The plan hinged on the bear's hunger overtaking its aggression. Jake hurried back to the cabin just as the bear, now more agitated than ever, slammed against the door again, nearly breaking through. But then, the scent of the food caught its attention. The bear paused, sniffing the air. Slowly it turned and began following the trail Jake had laid out. The growls faded as the bear lumbered away, distracted by the easy meal. Inside, the tension finally broke. They all exhaled, the weight of the moment crashing down on them. Jake's plan had worked. The bear, sated by the food, lost interest in the cabin and eventually disappeared into the woods. As the night wore on, they fortified the camp further and made sure the dumpsters were properly secured. The incident left a lasting impression on Jake. He had always respected nature, but now he saw the consequences of their carelessness. Logging and wildlife had always coexisted uneasily, but after that night, Jake was determined to push for better practices, ones that would keep both the workers and the animals safe. It was 2003 in the remote mountains of British Columbia, when a massive corporation set its sights on a rich vein of minerals buried beneath an ancient forest. But the land they wanted to deforest and exploit was not your usual lot of dirt. The area was, in fact, sacred to the indigenous community that lived near it. For centuries, this grove had been a place of reverence, believed to be protected by a legendary grizzly bear. Leading the community in their fight against the corporation was Maya, a 50-year-old elder who had dedicated her life to honoring her people's traditions while embracing the power of science. Maya was raised in the heart of the wilderness, her childhood shaped by the stories of her ancestors and the teachings of the land. Her father had taught her the sacredness of the grove, a place where her people had held ceremonies for generations. But Maya wasn't just rooted in tradition. She'd gone to university, studied environmental science, and returned to her community with a deep understanding of the ecosystem that helped create and sustain their culture. She saw no conflict between science and her heritage. Each strengthened the other. When the mining company came with promises of wealth and jobs, Maya stood firm. She knew the grove held more than just minerals. It was the lifeblood of her people, a sanctuary where they connected with their past and drew strength for their future. However, the corporation didn't care about cultural significance or environmental balance. They saw only the profit beneath the soil. As the corporation's heavy machinery moved into the forest, the atmosphere shifted. The community could feel it, an energy they couldn't explain. Trees fell, and the earth trembled under the weight of bulldozers and excavators. Then, the attacks began. Workers reported seeing a massive grizzly bear stalking the perimeter of the grove, its eyes gleaming with a wild intelligence. Equipment was found destroyed, claw marks gouged into steel, and the workers grew terrified. Some believed it was the legendary guardian bear, angry at the disturbance. Maya knew that the bear was no myth. The elders had passed down stories of the creature, who was said to be a protector of the sacred land and appeared only in times of great peril. But Maya also understood the behavior of grizzlies. The destruction of the forest threatened the bear's habitat, leaving it disoriented and aggressive. It wasn't just acting out of spiritual duty, it was fighting for survival. As months passed, Maya grew more desperate to save both her community and the forest. As such, she reached out to environmental activists. Together, they formed a coalition, uniting the indigenous traditions with modern conservation efforts. Maya led the charge, using her scientific knowledge to highlight the environmental catastrophe that mining would bring, while invoking the spiritual significance of the land to rally her people. The corporation wasn't backing down. They wanted the piece of land and its riches, and they were determined to get it by whatever means were necessary. They increased their security, bringing in guards and more equipment, determined to crush the resistance. Tensions boiled over, and the grove became a battleground. The activists organized protests, chaining themselves to trees and blocking roads, while the Maya people performed ancient rituals, calling upon the spirits of the land for protection. The showdown came one crisp August morning as the corporation prepared to tear down the heart of the sacred grove, and months had passed since the beginning of the conflict between the corporation and Maya's community. The latter were ready to defend the grove with their lives. The sound of machinery echoed through the valley that morning as a line of bulldozers advanced toward the ancient trees. Maya stood at the front, a symbol of defiance, flanked by members of her community and activists. They knew this would be their last stand. If the grove fell, so too would their connection to the past. As the bulldozers roared forward, the ground beneath them shook. Out of the forest came the grizzly, larger than any bear Maya had ever seen. Its fur was matted with dirt, and its eyes burned with fury. It charged toward the machines, a force of nature unleashed. The workers scattered in panic, abandoning their vehicles as the bear ripped through metal and machinery with terrifying strength. The bear's rage was unstoppable. It knocked over bulldozers, its claws slashing through tires and ripping apart engines. Sparks flew as metal crumpled under its weight. The corporation's guards attempted to subdue the bear, but nothing worked. Bullets barely slowed it down. It was as if the creature was possessed, driven by something deeper than instinct, a primal urge to protect the land its family had watched over for generations. The scene was chaotic, but amidst the destruction, Maya remained calm. She had expected this moment. The rituals her people had performed were not just symbolic. They had called upon the guardian spirit, and it had answered. But the bear couldn't fight forever. Maya knew the battle had to end without bloodshed for both the bear and the community. Drawing upon her knowledge of wildlife behavior, Maya instructed the activists to set up a blockade using fresh meat far from the grove, hoping to lure the bear away without further violence. It was a dangerous gamble. If the bear didn't take the bait, it could continue its rampage, and the corporation might retaliate with more force. Time seemed to slow as they set the plan into motion. The bear, still enraged, circled the grove, its powerful body tense and ready to attack again, but then it caught the scent of the food. Slowly, its aggression subsided, replaced by hunger. It turned away from the ruined machines, following the trail Maya's team had laid out, disappearing back into the depths of the forest. With the bear gone, the tension in the air lifted, but the damage was done. The grove was scarred and the machines lay in ruins. The corporation, facing the wrath of the public after the activists had documented everything, was forced to halt operations. The media had picked up the story of the legendary bear and the fight to save the sacred land. Public pressure mounted, and soon the government intervened, declaring the grove a protected area. Months later, Maya stood at the edge of the forest, looking out over the land she had fought so hard to save. The victory was bittersweet. The grove had survived, but at a cost. Yet Maya knew that this battle was just one in a much larger war. Her community's traditions and the natural world they were connected to were under constant threat. But for now, the grove and the legendary bear would rest, protected from exploitation. Maya's fight had shown that the ancient wisdom of her people, combined with modern knowledge, could stand against even the most powerful forces. It was April 2021 when a team of scientists embarked on a research expedition deep into the Arctic. Their mission was to study the effects of climate change on polar bear populations, documenting how rising temperatures and shrinking ice habitats were forcing the bears to adapt. Dr. Elena Ramirez, a 38-year-old wildlife biologist, led the team. For Elena, this expedition was more than just a job. It was a lifelong passion. Elena Ramirez had grown up fascinated by nature and all its wonders. She spent a good chunk of her childhood exploring the forests and mountains near her home, where she would track animal prints in the dirt and sketch birds in her notebook. Her curiosity about the world around her drove her to become a scientist. After earning her PhD, she focused on studying Arctic wildlife, which was so different from what she knew and observed growing up. But Elena was determined to understand the impacts of climate change on some of the planet's most vulnerable species. The Arctic was a place she had come to know intimately over the years, and she was deeply invested in protecting it. But this expedition was different. Something was wrong. Reports had come in from other research teams of unusual bear sightings, grizzly bears, far outside their typical range, appearing near polar bear habitats. Elena's team had set out to investigate these reports, and what they discovered was alarming. The shrinking ice and warming climate were not only pushing polar bears into smaller, isolated areas, but also driving grizzlies north in search of food. The delicate balance of the Arctic ecosystem was unraveling. In the second week of the expedition, the team's remote base was disrupted unexpectedly. One evening, as the scientists were analyzing data, they heard the unmistakable sound of something heavy moving outside. Elena had a hunch. She grabbed her binoculars and peered out into the pale twilight of the Arctic evening. That's when she saw it. A massive grizzly bear, far larger than she had ever encountered, lumbering through the snow. Its movements were slow and deliberate, as if it were confused by its unfamiliar surroundings. The woman's heart raced. The bear wasn't supposed to be here. Grizzlies thrived in forests and tundra, not the frozen expanse of the Arctic. But here it was, displaced and driven by hunger. And this bear wasn't just passing through. It was investigating the base. Elena raised the alarm. The team scrambled to secure their perimeter, locking the door. But it didn't take long for the situation to escalate. The bear grew more aggressive. It circled the base, swiping at the walls with its powerful claws. Every thud against the metal sent a shock through the team. Supplies were limited, and they had no means of calling for immediate help. Their communication system had been unreliable since arriving due to the harsh weather conditions. As the bear continued its assault, Elena started putting two and two together. What if this wasn't just an isolated case? Over the past few days, the team had spotted other bear tracks, grizzlies migrating northward, following the same path of desperation. This grizzly wasn't just hungry. It was part of a larger movement, one that threatened the already fragile balance of the Arctic ecosystem. The polar bears, already struggling to survive, now faced competition from a species that had never been their rival before. What would this mean for the ecosystem? But there was no time to dwell on the ecological implications. The grizzly was relentless. After hours of circling and testing their defenses, it found a weak spot, a corner where the wall of the base was less reinforced. With a roar that shook the air, the bear slammed into the wall, denting the metal and sending the team into a frenzy. They had minutes, maybe seconds, to act before the bear broke through. Elena's mind raced. She needed a plan, something that would keep the bear at bay without escalating the situation. They had no firearms. They had come prepared for polar bears, which could be scared off with flares and noise deterrents. But grizzlies were a different beast entirely. This bear was too desperate, too powerful. Then it hit her. She remembered something from her years of studying wildlife behavior. Bears, both grizzlies and polar bears, were highly territorial, especially when it came to food. They wouldn't willingly share a food source with other bears. If Elena could make the grizzly believe there was another bear nearby, it might retreat, thinking it was encroaching on another predator's territory. The team quickly gathered all the remaining food supplies, stacking them near the breach in the wall. Elena instructed the team to create noise, mimicking the presence of another bear defending its kill. It was a risky gamble, and they felt foolish as they roared, huffed, and puffed, but they had no other option. Any plan was better than no plan. Still, Elena decided that using their limited supply of flare guns was also necessary. The bear's head broke through the wall, but as it did so, it was greeted by a flurry of noise and light. The flare lit up the night sky, and the scent of the food hit the bear's nose. It hesitated, looking around as if expecting to find another bear. For a few agonizing moments, the team held their breath, watching as the massive creature sniffed the air, its aggression wavering. Finally, it backed away, grunting in frustration, before turning and lumbering off into the darkness. The team let out a collective sigh of relief, but they knew their ordeal wasn't over. The bear could return, and others might follow. They couldn't rely on makeshift defenses forever. Over the next few days, Elena and her team worked around the clock to reinforce the base and develop long-term strategies for coexisting with the migrating grizzlies. It was clear that this wasn't just a one-time incident. The bears were moving north, and with them came the need for a new approach to conservation. Elena knew that their work would lead to important changes, conservation efforts that would have to adapt to a rapidly changing climate. The bears, both grizzlies and polar, were now linked in a fragile, interconnected system. And it was up to scientists like her to find a way to preserve it before it was too late. 25-year-old Alex Rivera loved nothing more than to venture into the forgotten remains of cities. For years, he had been an urban explorer, fascinated by crumbling structures and nature's reclamation of abandoned places. On October 12, 2022, the 25-year-old was on a new adventure. This time, he was exploring a city park on the outskirts of Seattle. The park, once a bustling green space, had been left to decay after city expansion projects redirected attention and funding elsewhere. Now, overgrown with wild flora and punctuated by rusted playgrounds, it called to Alex as the perfect place to document his next exploration. Alex had his sights set on the park's old pavilion, a crumbling structure partially hidden by dense foliage. He had heard rumors of its decrepit state, the roof sagging under decades of neglect, and he was eager to photograph it before nature claimed it entirely. Unbeknownst to Alex, the park was more than just a decaying relic. It had become a refuge for wildlife displaced by urban development. As he picked his way through the dense vegetation, Alex focused on capturing the textures and shadows of the dilapidated structures. The air was crisp, and the autumn leaves crunched beneath his boots. He was absorbed in his work, oblivious to the subtle signs of animal activity nearby. The ground had been disturbed and branches were snapped, but Alex, deep in his photographer's mindset, dismissed them as natural wear and tear. When he finally approached the pavilion, his heart quickened with excitement. The structure was even more deteriorated than he had imagined. Vines crept up its sides, and the roof sagged dangerously in the middle, creating a hauntingly beautiful scene. He snapped a few shots and moved in closer for a better angle. That was when he heard it, a low growl, barely audible at first, but unmistakable. Still, he couldn't believe his ears. Was that a bear? Before the young man could react, a massive grizzly emerged from the shadows of the pavilion, confirming Alex's worst fears. The bear had been resting, its den hidden within the crumbling building. Forced from their natural habitats by encroaching cities and highways, a population of grizzly bears had retreated to the outskirts, seeking shelter in areas like this forgotten park. Startled and feeling threatened, the bear charged. Alex froze for a moment, the camera slipping from his hands as fear gripped him. He turned to run, but the bear was already too close. In one powerful swipe, the bear's claws raked across Alex's arm, sending him sprawling to the ground. Pain shot through him as blood soaked his sleeve. Desperately, Alex scrambled to his feet, clutching his injured arm. The bear, driven by instinct, continued its pursuit, forcing Alex into the pavilion. The structure groaned under his weight as he stumbled through the entrance. The roof, already weakened by years of decay, began to crack and shift with each step. Trapped, Alex scanned his surroundings for an escape. The pavilion was a death trap, its rotting walls barely standing, and the bear blocking the only visible exit. The bear growled again, edging closer. Alex's heart pounded both from the terror of the bear and the realization that the pavilion could collapse at any moment. The building trembled, dust and debris falling from the ceiling with every movement. Alex had to think fast. He remembered his earlier exploration, how the park's structures had been interconnected through hidden maintenance tunnels, remnants from when the park had been a bustling urban space. If he could find one of those tunnels, he might escape the pavilion without confronting the bear directly. But time was running out. The bear advanced, its breath heavy and menacing. Alex spotted a loose floorboard near the far corner of the pavilion. In a desperate move, he lunged for it, using his good arm to pry the board up just enough to reveal a dark hole beneath, the entrance to one of the forgotten tunnels. He couldn't believe his luck. Summoning every ounce of strength, Alex squeezed into the hole just as the bear lunged. He felt the wood splinter behind him as the bear's weight crashed into the pavilion. The structure gave a final groan before part of the roof caved in, sending debris crashing down between Alex and the bear. Trapped behind the rubble, the bear roared in frustration, but it couldn't reach him. Alex, now crawling through the narrow tunnel, winced with every movement of his injured arm. He could hear the bear's frustrated growls above as it paced the wreckage. But the tunnel held, and Alex pushed forward inch by inch until he finally emerged outside, away from the pavilion and the enraged bear. Gasping for breath, Alex stumbled to his feet and looked back at the crumbling structure. Alex's arm throbbed with pain, but he was alive. The adrenaline coursing through his veins began to ebb, leaving him shaken but determined. As Alex made his way back to safety, he knew that this experience would change him. He couldn't just walk away from this. He had to advocate for better urban planning and wildlife corridors to prevent more encounters like the one he had barely survived. Timber Ridge, a town nestled deep within the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest. A town where tranquility was the norm. Until it wasn't, a series of violent bear attacks had shattered the peace and calm over the past few months. These incidents had left locals terrified, and no one could understand why the grizzlies, creatures typically known to avoid humans, were suddenly so aggressive. The town, once quiet and unremarkable, had now become the subject of grim fascination. Rumors swirled, and fear grew as each attack seemed more brazen than the last. Officer Laura Bennett, a 30-year-old filled with big dreams and hope, had been assigned to investigate the mysterious bear attacks. Timber Ridge wasn't her first choice when she transferred from the city, but after a personal tragedy, she sought the isolation and quiet the town promised. However, the recent wave of incidents had pushed her into the spotlight as the town's authorities scrambled to explain the sudden bear violence. Laura wasn't just any officer. She was meticulous, sharp, and had a knack for solving puzzles others overlooked. She was suspicious of the simple explanations being tossed around. Local officials were quick to blame it on an increased bear population or scarce food sources, but Laura felt something more sinister was at play. As she delved into the investigation, strange inconsistencies emerged. It wasn't until the town's annual fair that everything changed. The fairgrounds were set up near the edge of Timber Ridge, where the woods began to thicken. That's where chaos erupted. A grizzly bear charged into the crowd. Screams echoed across the grounds as people scattered in all directions. Laura, who had been patrolling the event, was one of the first on the scene. Armed with little more than her sidearm, Laura moved swiftly to guide people away from the danger. As she approached the bear, something caught her attention. A piece of meat half buried in the dirt, clearly left behind as bait. Someone had deliberately drawn the bear to the fair, setting the stage for a deadly confrontation. But why? As Laura called in backup and ensured the safety of the townspeople, her mind raced. She went into the woods, moving through the thick underbrush until she stumbled upon a hidden trap. Metal snares, large enough to capture a full-grown grizzly, had been expertly camouflaged. Nearby, she discovered more bait, leading deeper into the forest. Whoever was responsible was trapping bears, but for what? Determined to uncover the truth, Laura sought out Jim Roberts, a wildlife biologist who had retreated to a cabin deep in the woods after a public falling out with the town's leadership. Jim was wary at first, but after hearing Laura's suspicions, he agreed to help her. Together, they mapped out the recent bear attacks and realized the pattern was anything but random. The bears weren't attacking because they were starving. They were being lured into populated areas and then captured by poachers operating under the town's nose. Grizzlies were a protected species, and their population in the region had been dwindling. Poachers could make a fortune by selling bear parts on the black market, but they needed to find a way to trap them without arousing suspicion. The recent bear attacks had served as a cover, making it seem like the bears were the threat when, in reality, they were the victims. As Laura and Jim dug deeper, the scope of the conspiracy became clear. High-ranking officials in the town were in on it. Corruption ran through the very people Laura had once trusted, and they were working with the poachers to ensure the bear attacks would drive fear into the townsfolk, making it easier for them to carry out their illegal hunts. The final piece of the puzzle came when Laura discovered a hidden underground network beneath the town's old logging facility. The poachers had been using it as a base of operations, smuggling bears out of the forest and transporting them undetected. The tunnels connected to several key areas of the town, including the woods where the traps had been set, making it nearly impossible to track their movements. The showdown came late one night when Laura and Jim, with the help of a small team of trustworthy officers, decided to raid the poachers' hideout. As they descended into the tunnels, they knew that confronting the poachers would be dangerous, but they had no other choice. The deeper they went, the more they realized how vast the operation was. Crates filled with illegal hunting gear lined the walls, and fresh tracks indicated that the poachers were close. Suddenly, they were ambushed. A firefight broke out in the narrow underground corridors. Laura, her heart pounding, pushed forward, determined to bring the criminals to justice. The poachers fought fiercely, but they were no match for the coordinated effort of the team. Laura, with Jim at her side, confronted the ringleader, a well-known town official who had masterminded the entire operation. The final moments of the battle were intense. The poachers, desperate and cornered, made a last-ditch effort to escape through a hidden passage, but Laura was faster, cutting them off before they could flee. The ringleader, realizing he had no way out, surrendered, and with his capture, the poaching ring collapsed. In the aftermath, the town began to rebuild, implementing stronger wildlife protections and learning the hard lesson that coexistence, not exploitation, was the key to survival.